I wasn't even thinking about Lestat when I wrote Interview with the Vampire. I was thinking about Louis. I mean, Louis was the hero. Everything revolved around Louis. Louis was me. I was Louis. I'm the only woman ever played by Brad Pitt in a movie.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you watched my last video, thank you so much. You have no idea how much that means to me. And for my new subscribers, thank you for subscribing. I appreciate you, and make sure to leave a comment below telling me your thoughts. Now, on to me obsessively breaking down a book I've read way too many times. Season 1, Episode 2, Phantoms of Our Former Self. The episode opens with Daniel being sat for a 10-course dinner. Armand says that Louis will be joining them around course 7. I just want to point out that Armand gets really defensive about Louis, saying that they're in the presence of a god. This was really well placed and will most likely come up later. We see a pan of the dishes served to Daniel, and these courses, in my opinion, are luxury dishes. Things that most people probably wouldn't get to try unless they come from some form of privilege or they go out of their way to find them. Immediately, I knew the theme of this episode would be of two things. One being humanity, and the obvious or not so obvious things in life we look past or connect to. Second, coming out, trying to embrace many changes of existence in the battle or balance of internalized hatred for oneself and the acceptance of our true individual existence. Examples being sexual orientation, race, and becoming a vampire. In this case, all of the above. An apparent difference from the book right off the bat is that Daniel and Louis share meals across from each other versus being secluded in a room in San Francisco. Louis arrives for dinner, and they pick back up discussing Louis' first night as a vampire. In the show, Louis stumbles behind Lestat as he drags the bodies of the priest in a buggy through a cemetery in search of a tomb to hide the evidence of a transformative evening. As Lestat is covering their tracks, Louis is looking around and seeing shimmers and colors enhancing, exploding all of his senses. Lestat turns to Louis and would mention seeing a spark in his eyes. Reminds me of someone's first time taking Alice Fun Guy with their best friend. That moment of making eye contact, knowing it's starting to hit the bloodstream, and they both can't help but laugh. I'm glad to know the show is slightly leading in this direction, as Louis recalls this moment asking Daniel about his best substance ride, if you catch my drift. Daniel would say, "So you were loaded?" And Louis says, "Beyond one's comprehension." Louis describes the vibrant colors and seeing for the first time as a vampire. Lestat tells him to go relieve himself of all of his human liquids. This is mentioned in the book. It would go on to say, "It was as if I had just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time. I was so enthralled with the buttons on Lestat's black coat." Lestat would say, "Stop looking at my buttons. Go out there into the trees and rid yourself of all human waste in your body, and don't fall so madly in love with the night that you lose your way." I wish they kept the "stop looking at my buttons" part in the show. Every time I read this passage, it makes me giggle every time. But I do feel like this childlike nature of being reborn is expressed within the first moments of Louis' new life. After Louis rids himself of his human waste, they end up going around town. This is when Lestat tries to guide Louis through the new life of being a vampire. Lestat would go on to describe humans as flavors, courses, delicacies, depending on the individual. They would end up heading to the bar where Lestat would say the humans taste a little sweeter. This would be Louis' first kill. At first, Louis is ready to pounce on the blonde sailor boy, but Lestat would hold him back, commending him on his eye for the prize, but he wasn't ready. Lestat would say, "Sometimes restraint is your most powerful weapon." They would meet the tractor salesman sitting at the bar. They approach him and would start a conversation. Louis and Lestat would communicate telepathically, while Louis is trying not to scare the tractor man away. If you paid attention to the conversation tractor man was talking about, he goes on this long spiel about his daughter and how Louisiana has a lot of farmland. This was his pitch. As someone who's been in sales, this made me laugh a lot more than it should have. Anyways, They get this man to come back to the townhouse. We can tell that he's automatically uncomfortable saying, "I'm only here to sell farm equipment." Lestat pours a glass of brandy and hands it to him, which makes Tractor Man a little more uncomfortable. Before he could contest, Lestat calmly says, "Whenever you're ready, Louis." And Louis would attack. Now, maybe I love the chaos, but Lestat was absolutely sadistically hilarious here with his glass of brandy, observing and guiding Louis like a suburban wine mom watching their 6-year-old play soccer. "No, not like that. Kick the ball. Kick with your legs. The ball." Like it was giving that kind of energy, and I'm here for it. Immediately after, Louis feels immense amounts of disgust, guilt, and shame for what he's done. As he watches Lestat rolling up the body into the rug, he makes one of the best unhinged comments.
For our next cup of them thinking Persian.
Lestat would speak of death and taking of life as a beautiful, wonderful, exciting thing to explore, and that within time, it will come naturally to Louis. All Louis has to respond with is, I want to go home. As if he's dreaming, as if none of this is real, as if he could turn back time. Yet, to grasp that indeed, he cannot go home. His life has changed forever. He would sprint out the door into the rising dawn. Instantly, he begins to burn. Each step into the sun's rays turn him to ash. He doesn't know what to do, but panics. He grabs the first thing he can to alleviate the burning. And that's when we get this iconic scene. Him pouring milk all over his body. Louis rushes back to Lestat, and Lestat would explain how the sun is no longer for them, but that this life of being a vampire has its many perks. They head to the secret room inside the master bedroom and lie inside Lestat's coffin for the night, ending Louis' first night as a vampire. Now, some of the differences in the book, like my last video, they are aesthetic differences, but the point, the reason, and the essence is the same, just executed differently. In the book, Louis' first night as a vampire, he's actually in the comfort of his home / on his property. Louis recalls his first moments as a vampire, very similar to the show. "I saw as a vampire. I saw him as I could have not possibly seen him before. He had seemed so white before, starkly white, so that in the night he was almost luminous. And now I saw him filled with his own life and his own blood. He was radiant, not luminous. I saw that not only Lestat changed, but all things had changed. It was as if I had only just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time." After Louis has his first moment of being a vampire and feeling his body dying, Lestat would bring in the overseer. If you don't know what an overseer is, they're the person you see in slave movies that are on the horse, watching and ensuring the slaves were staying, quote-unquote, productive. This was their job, an occupation historically grotesque, but it is what it is. Before I continue, I want to mention that in the show, I couldn't decide who the Tractor Man would represent. Obviously, he was Louis' first kill after turning, representing the overseer, but Book Louis' first solo kill or semi-solo kill was a group of runaway slaves. For this example, I'm going to refer to Tractor Man and the overseer as Louis' first guided kill. I'll discuss further on Louis' first solo kill a little bit later. But going back to the overseer. Lestat had taken the overseer as he slept and would bring him to Louis. Louis would say, "I was to watch and improve. That is, to witness the taking of a human life as proof of my commitment as part of my change. This proved, without a doubt, to be the most difficult part for me." Louis is not having a good time, recollecting how disgusted, nauseous, and feverish he felt from the sight of the body. He would go on to describe how he had no problem with his own death, a little squeamish of taking his own life, but to take the life of another callously, he would say, "But I had the most high regard for the life of others, and a horror of death most recently developed after the death of my brother." After Louis' first drink of human blood to complete his transition, they must get rid of the body. They would head up to the riverside road until they came across some open fields. Once there, they would tear off the overseer's coat, steal his money, and replace liquor on his lips to pass it off as a drunk man getting beaten, robbed, and killed. While they're doing this, Louis recalls his memories from that night. He goes on to say, "I knew his wife who lived in New Orleans, and knew the state of desperation she would suffer when the body was discovered. I felt pain that she would never know what had happened, that her husband had not been found drunk on the road by robbers." As they're beating the dead overseer's body, Louis is thinking about this, but in the same thought process, he says, "It was then that I became aroused."
Stop it. Get some help.
I'm sure Daniel in the book gave him a really weird look, so Louis continues with, "Of course, you must realize that all this time, the vampire Lestat was extraordinary. He was no more human to me than a biblical angel." This line of thinking is mentioned throughout this episode expressed by Louis, going into how captivating Lestat is, how he has this powerful way about himself, the ability to influence and sway the energy in his favor. How Louis did make the choices he made, but Lestat had a way about him that would dissipate any doubt within himself. After the overseer is staged in the field, they head back to the plantation. In the book, Louis is adamant that Lestat wants the plantation and all of his money. This gets a little complicated, and it is mentioned in the book Vampire Lestat in its epilogue. Louis' first night as a vampire is over, and as the sun begins to approach the horizon, they would sleep together in Lestat's coffin. Now we're moving on to Lestat as a teacher. Going back to the show, Lestat and Louis had their first night together, and the next night they would explore the city as Lestat begins to show Louis the power of being a vampire. Lestat would show Louis how to read minds. In the book and in the movie, Louis couldn't read minds, but in the show he can, which is kind of a unique difference. This conversation is interesting because Lestat mentions that he could read Louis' mind when he was human, but now that he's changed, he can no longer read his thoughts. It's giving Sparkly Edward vibes, but I digress. Louis is new to being a vampire, and he's having a hard time articulating his questions for Lestat on this new life. It's like he doesn't know what to ask, and he's hoping Lestat would guide him and show him and tell him. He would become critical of Lestat within the first few weeks of turning. In the book, Louis quickly learns that he does not like Lestat. While they lay for the first night together in the coffin, while Louis' human body is officially dying, he would tell Daniel, "The first thing that became apparent to me, even while Lestat and I were loading the coffins into the hearse and stealing another coffin in the mortuary, was that I did not like Lestat at all." In the show and in the book, Louis expresses his dissatisfaction with Lestat's teaching methods. And in the book, while Louis and Lestat are playing solitaire, Louis mentions that Lestat is going on and on about how he'd get used to killing, it would be nothing, and he must not allow himself to be shaken. He would say, "For me, the experience of killing had been cataclysmic. These experiences overwhelmed and so changed my view of everything around me. From the portrait of Paul on the parlor wall to the sight of a singular star in the utmost panel of the French windows, that I could not imagine a vampire taking them for granted. I was altered permanently." He would say that Lestat was the opposite, and Louis questions if he felt anything at all. He would go on to say, "As boring as mortal, trivial and unhappy as mortal, he chattered over the game, belittling my experience. Utterly locked on his own experience. By morning, I realized I was his complete superior, and I had sadly been cheated in having him as a teacher. I felt cold towards him." Yet, he feels forced to be with him because there are no other vampires that he knows of, and he needs to stick around to learn. Though it's a little bit more complicated because, as mentioned, Louis consistently says that Lestat just has this way about him that put down all of his walls. They captured Louis and Lestat's strained relationship pretty well into the show. Now, Louis would go and visit his family back home in the show. His mother would greet them at the doorstep, and she gives Lestat the energy of untrust and tells Lestat to go mingle amongst the guests and give Louis time with his family. While talking to his mother, Louis can hear her thoughts. She's suspecting Louis of being a gay man and making comments about his style, specifically his glasses, and his changes since hanging out with Lestat. He tells her that the glasses are prescribed to deter away any suspicion. He would now go inside to see his sister. They're really happy to see each other. He slips up a little bit when hugging her and makes a comment on her being pregnant and hearing 2 heartbeats. As they catch up, she takes his glasses off and immediately sees his eyes are different, comparing them to stained glass windows in a church. She isn't as suspicious and just says he looks happy. These are the kind of sisters that are the best, just undying love and support. He makes a promise to not stay away too long and to visit often. In the book, Louis does have contact with his sister after his transition, but it's not even close to the connection Louis in the show has with his sister. Book Louis moves his family to New Orleans and provides for them financially from afar. I'm sure the show will bring this up eventually, so I'll dive deeper into this relationship when the time comes. Now on to Louis' first solo kill being Mr. Carlo. As mentioned earlier, I think Mr. Carlo is an adaptation to the runaway slaves killed. Let me explain. In the book, Louis is having a hard time hunting and killing. Lestat would bring them to the outskirts of the plantation, and that's when they would encounter a group of runaway slaves camping out for the night. One of the slaves would go into the tree to go pee, and that's when they would attack. This is kind of a botched job. The slave that's peeing is knowing the vibes are off, so he pulls out a knife. That's when Lestat tells Louis to take him. Obviously, Louis is stunned, and because of this hesitation, the runaway heard them, making it too late. Lestat would quickly grab the man, telling Louis to drink, but before Louis could attack the slave, he would cry out, alerting the others who would come running. This becomes a cluster of a mess. Louis would feed on this slave, but this incident would result in Lestat killing the rest of them, and when he would return to Louis, he would say, "You sicken me." In the show, there is an obvious change in eras, and they're currently living under Jim Crow. Louis, as a business partner, wants to buy this property and renovate it to a private saloon for Mr. Alderman. He would meet with Mr. Carlo. Mr. Carlo, being a racist man, would condescendingly tell him he's an exceptional N-word. This would push Louis over the edge, and he ends up killing him solo without Lestat being around. And he says to Daniel, unfortunately for him, he chose tonight to dabble around with fuckery. Now you're probably asking me, how does Mr. Carlo and runaway slaves correlate? Well, in my personal opinion, in the show, Louis mentions he got fed up with having to talk to people like a slave. "Thank you, sir. Yes, sir." Smile and nod. He says that he had allowed them to speak to him this way for far too long, that he didn't even realize it. He was no longer a man, but something different. And if it wasn't Mr. Carlo, it would have been someone else due to decades of built-up anger. After killing Mr. Carlo, though it wasn't a botched job like the runaway slave incident in the book, it was botched because this man was someone of importance. Lestat is obviously upset. I think the writers of the show took the runaway slaves moment from the book to give power back to Louis in the show. Also, possibly, to display a theme of marginalization of particular groups in society. In the book, Louis is super sympathetic to the overseer's family, and again, he was a slave owner, a character in which would be hard for modern-day audiences to sympathize with. Taking the lives of the runaways is symbolic because they were a demographic that wouldn't be missed on societal standards. Missed by their family on the plantation? Yes. By society? No. Louis being a Creole man in Jim Crow, it was hard, if not impossible, to gain any power as a person of color. I think the show went and turned it on its head. Even in the show, while they're throwing the body into the incinerator, Lestat would sarcastically say, "Yes, let's have this conversation once again," pertaining to society in America at that time. Louis explains, "Yes, this is a complicated situation, but we're different," and Lestat doesn't really see it.
This was an important man in town. The police will be looking for this man fledgling.
Instead of Louis hesitating on attacking in the book, Louis in the show does not hesitate to kill. He even justifies it by saying, He disrespected me. I could be reaching, but I see the similarity from the book, and I wonder if Mr. Carlo represents the other end of the runaway slaves. A person of importance based on race versus a person of non-importance based on race. Louis being upper middle class plantation owner versus Louis being a free person of color in the red light district of Louisiana, New Orleans. Polar opposites in terms of societal placements, taking power and gaining power. Again, I could be reaching, but you guys let me know what you think in the comments. I'm really curious on your thoughts on that. Though Lestat is toxic, that same night while they're laying in the coffin, Lestat would speak up and say, "If he ever disrespected you, I would have killed him myself." He then asked Louis what he could do to make it up to him. Louis would request to purchase the saloon, which is a really gracious gift as an apology. They would go on to run the saloon for 6 years, making plenty of money. In the book, Louis brushes over how they acquired money on the side to keep the plantation running. But within 4 years of living relatively quiet lives, Lestat would commit petty theft and Louis would invest the money. Moving on to Louis and Lestat's attachments to humanity. In the show during this time, Louis understands his neglect of his sister and mother, so he goes to pay his sister a visit. Again, 6 years have passed, so the twins he heard the heartbeats of are about 5 years old, and she has a new baby, Louis' nephew. His sister is upset about his absence, but is overall happy to see him. She encourages him to hold the baby while she grabs a bowl of gumbo. Louis is fighting everything in his body, every primal instinct to not hurt this baby. When she comes back, he tries to give the baby back to her, to no avail. She once again is quickly called away due to the twins crying and her lazy husband demanding her to go check on them, leaving Louis alone with the baby. Daniel repeatedly asked the question, "Did you eat the baby?" while Louis sits across from him describing his impulse in this moment with his nephew. He did not eat the baby. Instead of indulging and taking the life of his nephew, he flees the house. His sister runs back to the room and finds her baby lying on the floor, and Louis is gone. Louis is distraught when he gets back to Lestat, feeling guilty and disgusted with himself. Lestat gives an attempt to console his emotions. Lestat would tell Louis that he needs to stop seeing his family, that if they were to find out the truth of what he was, they would be fearful of him, and that it's best to spare them the pain. This is when Louis realizes that he would never have a family of his own. This comment visibly hurts Lestat, and he would say, "I'm your family, Louis." Louis proclaims his wish to die, that Lestat could just go make another one of him. Lestat would say, "Of walking 2 centuries on this earth, I can report that there is no other twin like you. That Louis is a challenge every sunset, that he wouldn't have it any other way." Let's take a step back, because in the book The Vampire Lestat and its epilogue, Lestat mentions seeing Louis for the first time and how he was a twin of Nicholas. I'll give a little bit of a deeper dive into that later on, but I found it ironic that he's saying these things to Louis. Nicholas was a young violin player with whom Lestat was in a romantic relationship while he was still human and living in Paris. Nicholas, or Nicky, would be turned by Lestat, but would have a hard time with his transition in very similar ways to Louis and his hard time of turning. Now back to the show. After the attempt to soothe Louis' feelings about the incident with his nephew, Lestat would stand up and suggest going on holiday to see the opera of Donizetti's Don Pasquale. Already have bought the tickets. Lestat would talk incessantly about the beauty of the show, pretty much dismissing Louis' feelings. Louis would be in shock, saying, "I just almost killed my nephew." Lestat being Lestat railroading the conversation, he sedates his frustration by holding up a pair of suits and mentions of a private box, relying how he was neglectful of their romance. Louis would say to Daniel once again, he had a way about him those first few years. They would go on to attend the opera. Again, this is Jim Crow, so in order for Louis to make it through the front doors, he would have to play a part of being Lestat's chauffeur. He wouldn't be able to take a seat until the curtains are drawn and the lights turn off. Lestat would bring his personal score notebook to keep up with the opera. Before the show begins, Lestat would tell Louis, "There is one thing about being a vampire that I fear above all else, and that is loneliness. That the void and emptiness he feels stretching out for decades at a time is something he hates feeling." Telling Louis that he takes this feeling away from him, and they should never part ways. Louis would ask how many vampires there are, and Lestat would say not many. This was a very vulnerable moment for Lestat to express, and I hate to say it, but Lestat is my personal favorite character. Yes, he's toxic and he's very evil, but he's the kind of hurt evil, the one that's created, not born. In need of connection and affection, fear of being alone. Yes, it's possessive, but I feel like he is relatable in terms of wanting to give and nurture due to his own abandonment. He doesn't execute this in the healthiest of ways, but he's a vampire, and I wouldn't know how a vampire would cope with these feelings, but as a human, I understand his twisted desire to love and be loved in return. The opera would begin, and Louis sees the light and excitement inside of Lestat. Lestat's impressed with the soprano. He would lean forward and follow along with his music notes. Louis would observe and say, "But music was when Lestat would separate man from food. Music pierced his soul. Any human who were involved with the creation of music existed on an elevated plane in his eyes." Louis would go on to say, "I was moved that he too had his human attachments." I feel like this was an adaptation displaying Lestat's humanity in the book, but instead of going to the theater and embracing music, it would be his dying father. In the book, Lestat's father is an old blind man who doesn't know that his son is a vampire. They all live on Louis' plantation. While his father is lying ill with cold sweats and heavy breathing, begging for his own death, Louis has sympathy for him, while Lestat would go around playing a spinet without a care in the world for his dying father. Louis begs Lestat to go talk to his father. Lestat could care less, but he would go into the bedroom where his father lay, and he would sit, cross his legs, and begin to file his nails. His father would ask for forgiveness, and he would mention the school, saying, "It was the school. Oh, I remember. What can I say to you? You'll never forgive me, will you? Not now, not even after I'm dead." Lestat would yell, "I don't know what you're talking about." Louis would see this as an old man pleading with a warm heart, but to Lestat, this is either revenge, or he wants his father to tell him exactly why he wants his forgiveness, to elaborate more. All the while this is happening, the slaves of Pont du Lac have suspected some weird activities going on in regard to Louis. One of the slaves would end up getting killed because his suspicion was growing and they saw his fear. Because of this death, the other slaves are alerted. Lestat's father is dying, again begging for his own death. Lestat tells Louis to kill him because he can't kill his own father. Louis begs Lestat to just lean over the pillow and tell him you forgive him. You forgive him for taking you out of the school as a little boy. Lestat refuses and starts dancing around. He's paranoid at the slaves creating an uprising because he can hear them approaching. His father would confess his wrongs to Lestat, saying, "You are the Joseph amongst your brothers, the best of them, but how was I to know? It was when you were gone that I knew, when all those years passed and they offered me no comfort, no solace. But then you came back to the farm to take me away, except it wasn't you. It wasn't the same boy." Louis drags Lestat to his father's bedside and describes it as being the first time seeing Lestat as weak, but at the same time enraged. Louis would stand over Lestat and say, "Forgive." Lestat leans over the bed and says, "I forgive you, father. You must rest easy. I hold nothing against you." His voice was thin and strained over his own anger. His father would relax, mumble something, but a peace would wash over him, and Louis took his life gently. The slaves would revolt against Louis and Lestat and burn the plantation down, forcing them to flee. Back to the show. Lestat's adornedness is soured once Ernesto, the tenor, takes the stage. Lestat would become visibly upset with his lack of talent, his inability to hit keys perfectly, leading Lestat to kind of have a moment. To keep himself composed, no pun intended, he slits a cut in his finger and notates where the tenor is slacking. When the show ends, Lestat gives the most condescending clap, showing his disdain. Louis and Lestat would have drinks and mingle with the cast after the show. Lestat would purposely become friendly with Ernesto, and eventually he would invite him back, and they would join him and Louis back at their hotel. The sadistic nature of Lestat is shown at 100%. He would open up his scorebook and make Ernesto perform with him, ridiculing everything about his supposed talent. Louis would say, "You could see all the doubt the young man had about his art, about himself exposed on his nodding, agreeable face." Lestat would ruin a lifetime of confidence and joy in less than half an hour. Lestat took pleasure in humiliating this man, before digging his nails into Ernesto's throat, making it impossible for him to scream or sing. Louis would say, "Why do you do that?" And Lestat would respond, "Because I enjoy it."
Why do you do this, Lestat?
Well, I like to do it. I enjoy it.
Well, I don't.
Again, I hate to say it, but this made me cackle. But this would start an argument between Louis and Lestat, and we as the audience get to relive a moment that was executed in the 1994 movie.
Well, I don't say that you have to enjoy it! Kill them swiftly if you have to!
So just like the 1994 film and now the show, this is almost a direct quote from the book. It would go, "Why do you do this, Lestat?" I asked. "I like to do it," he said. "I enjoy it." He looked at me. "I don't say that you have to enjoy it. Take your aesthete's taste to purer things. Kill them swiftly if you will, but do it. Learn that you're a killer." He threw up his hands in disgust.
Why do you do this? I like to do it. I enjoy it.
He then proceeds to go back to the body of Ernesto, picking him up, as cool as a cucumber, and says, "Come now, love. Let's take you back to the room to die." There, Lestat would slowly drain Ernesto's blood into a coup glass and drink it, while Louis sits across from him reading Ernesto's thoughts, seeing all of his memories of his life flash before his eyes. This was quite sad, and a pinnacle of why Louis hates Lestat, hates taking life, and above all, hates the sadistic nature of how Lestat tortured this man. Unfortunately, Louis would join Lestat in the taking and drinking of Ernesto's life. The scene reminds me of the moment in the book where they're beating the body of the overseer, and how Louis begins to get aroused but at the same time is disgusted. He hates what he's doing, but his impulse leads him to indulge. Now we cut to the last scene of the episode. Daniel and Louis are served the final course, which is dessert. Both Louis and Daniel are served the same plate. Louis would say he tries to have one human meal a week to maintain the thread to humanity. This would puzzle Daniel, prompting him to ask, "What does human food taste like?" Louis would say, "Chalk, paste, or even soap." Daniel would recall that this was the first dessert he had with his first wife after he proposed to her. Daniel would go into great detail, remembering where they were, the type of restaurant, describing in great detail the scenery, the street. He even mentions vividly the small human imperfections of his wife. How one eyebrow was discolored, and how he liked it when she didn't try and dye it brown. A nice memory. He would then close his laptop and sit with Louis one-on-one, enjoying the dessert. I feel like this was perfect. A perfect way to display the mundaneness of humanity. How we as humans take moments like this for granted. And I believe Daniel fully understood what Louis was kind of talking about in terms of why he tries to keep his human attachment. Food and sharing of food is one of the oldest ways we as humans have gained a strong connection to each other. And being a vampire, he was stripped away from that, making life cold and isolated. Well, that's the end of Season 1, Episode 2, Phantoms of Our Former Selves. I think they did a great job capturing the essence of Louis' difficulty of leaving his human self, showing his compassion and respect for human life. The duality of Lestat and Louis, and how one can be in a similar place with similar travesties, but how one decides to mold themselves while walking in darkness. Resentment or reconcile. You guys let me know what you think. Go ahead and leave a comment expressing your thoughts and opinions. Do you agree or disagree with any of my takes? Please let me know. I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you want more installments. Until next time.